This should be an entertaining topic unless if DarkKnightNation bleeps it up. That's me. I am the king of all bleepers. Silver Batman Ranger. Thanks, man, for popping by. And apropos Mark McKeever's thing. Joe's Geek Show. I can't wait for you to explain how the Watchmen movie is the best comic adaptation of all time. Joey, I already had that rant today. Don't fucking make me do it again.
Also, I don't think that's coming up in this video.
Yeah, no. We're talking about good things, the comics that made us, not the movies that destroyed us. Cool. Oh, we got a couple people popping in. I just think that before you know what? I'll kind of mid-roll plug the book.
Yeah, go for it, dude.
That's when people are gonna be here and whatnot. Because I'm desperate.
No, man, do what you got to do.
So, alas, I'll intro us in. Hey, guys, welcome to the 71st episode of Let's Talk Comics, where myself and another co-host in the comics community discuss one of the many facets of the storytelling medium that is comics, whether it be stories, creators, adaptations, constructs. We hit it all. This week, I am rejoined for the first time in a good while, gloriously by the one and only NerdScum. My man, it is good to be sitting down with you.
Right on, dude. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk this stuff out. This should be fun.
Yeah. So this was actually a conversation that was presented by Corey, by NerdScum, I should say. And I thought that it was just really cool. It's an evergreen conversation. And what's great is I feel like depending on the time of day, we could have this conversation and our answers could be totally different. So that's great. It just provides a level of versatility. And who knows, maybe we do one again that's specifically themed. What comics made us this way? What made me pretentious? I don't know. We'll figure it out though. But I'm curious, man. You're the guest. What's the first comic you want to talk about that you feel like really made you, that inspired you in some degree to who you are today?
Right on. So yeah, I'm going to start off with one that it's one that I probably don't have as much to say about, but for all my picks, I tried to pick things that, were pretty influential at different points in my life to me. Mm-hmm. And despite the fact that I say I don't have a lot to say about it, like right now, I recently thought I might be having to move. So a lot of my stuff's packed up. Out of all my books on the list, this is the only one that's still out. So I can go through it anytime I want. And that's, Batman versus Predator. Yeah. So Batman versus Predator, I was a weird kid. So when I was very young, I watched a lot of movies I shouldn't have been watching. So I was aware I'd seen the Batman movies, I'd seen the Predator movies, and my dad had this book. Okay. And it was one of those things that just blew my mind at that age. I had to be 5 or 6, at the time. And I was just for a lot of people, when Grant Morrison went on to Justice League and then Batman, that started the whole trend of Batman can beat anybody with prep time, and Bat God. But no, for me, it was this book where I was like, holy crap, Batman can fight the Predator? Then that's it for me. Batman's my guy at that point, Okay. And, it was originally released in 1991. It's written by Dave Gibbons. It's got art by 2 of the Kuberts, So the book is,
Does it really? Both Kuberts?
It's got Andy and Adam. So it's one of those things where not only is it a book that just the concept is cool, but for something that should be a throwaway crossover, it is really well done. The art in it is just absolutely gorgeous and iconic. It has some of my favorite comic book covers of all time. And the other thing is it works in the same way that a great Batman story and a great Predator story works, so you have the Batman thing where he's fighting street crime and all that kind of stuff. Just a great straightforward Batman book. And it does the thing that a great Predator story does, which a great Predator story is a kind of mediocre, but awesome B action movie. And then somewhere after the first act, all of a sudden a Predator shows up and just screws people's day up.
That's fair. So it's funny because I've never been able to get into like those crossovers with other franchises. It's just never really gotten me. I actually had a big thing like until it became really popular. I really avoided like the Injustice comics too, which turned out to be pretty great, but there's something that always turned me off, but it sounds like you kind of found it at the perfect time.
I did, especially because like in this collection it's got all three of the Batman versus Predators, and only one of them is great. So the first one's great, and the third one, which is written by Chuck Dixon, is pretty good. But I don't. Tim Drake fights a Predator and does pretty well, and I'm like, I don't know about that. But the second one is just absolute garbage, and then like the Batman and Superman versus Alien and Predators is trash. So like, I feel you. A lot of these intercompany crossovers are very dicey. But Batman versus Predator, as well as the original Batman versus Alien, are really strong books. And also it kind of does, because this is like, it's not technically in continuity, but it works in like the post-crisis continuity in a lot of ways. It has all the staples of that period of Batman. And it's also like in post-crisis, they didn't really do the thing for a while where like Batman's got a costume for every event, like for everything he might need. But in this book, it's great because you see Batman has a suit that he uses to fight the Predator that he's already working on. Mm-hmm. And despite the fact that it's different, it's highly influenced by the Dark Knight Returns suit that he uses to battle Superman.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and so I feel like not only was this book like a fun, solid book, but I felt that it also set a lot of precedents for where we would see Batman going in the future as a character.
That's interesting.
So yeah, that's my first one. It's just like a really solid, great read. Like I said, the art's great. Dave Gibbons does a great job writing it. It's just like everyone's characterized so well, like from Batman to Alfred to Gordon. It's definitely got some cheese in it though, like Batman in the first fight gets his ass handed to him by the Predator. And he's down for a few days. So like someone convinces Gordon that like, well, it's been days. If Batman doesn't show up like in the next 48 hours, he's dead, And so like there's a moment where finally like they turn the bat signal off and you just see Predator like on top of a building like, I'm the king.
I've always found that interesting, right? Because like I don't know, I don't claim to be like a movie buff, so I guess there's no card to take away, but I've never seen a whole Alien and or Predator movie. Like I think I saw parts of AVP when I was younger. And I just remember thinking, Predator looks kind of cool, but like isn't he kind of also an alien? So isn't it kind of Alien versus Alien?
Yeah. But like colloquially, I suppose the aliens, despite actually being xenomorphs, they just call them alien. So in terms of title, it works. But yeah, they are both aliens for sure. And the AVP book, like forget about the movie, like it's popcorn fun trash. And like I enjoy it from time to time. It has a lot of fun things in it. But that original Batman versus Predator book, or not Batman, I'm sorry, Alien versus Predator book is really solid. Like, it's another one of those crossovers that is just way better than it has any right to be.
Wow, yeah. That might be worth having a drink and sitting down and knocking that one out. Honestly,
yeah, I would recommend it for sure.
Okay,
I enjoy Batman versus Predator more, but that's because it's got Batman in it.
That's fair. I also think like it's oddly enough, I didn't expect you to say something like Batman versus Predator, but after getting to know you, I'm kind of not surprised. Like it seems like it's very informative of like your taste,
Very much so. Yeah. And again, those were two franchises that already at a young age, because I saw Predator way before I should have been allowed to see Predator. But, it was like I was that kid who was like 5 years old and like, daycare drawing pictures of Predator. And my teachers were like, what the hell? Or like the people are like, what the hell is this? What? So yeah, like it's a book that it was just one of those things where I was like, all the things that I love can coexist. And when you put them together, it automatically equals awesomeness, which didn't turn out to be true, but it was highly influential on the way that I viewed the media that I enjoyed. And it also kind of bridged the gap because, like as a kid that young, it's way easier to invest in a movie on some level than it is a comic. But it was definitely one of those things that was like, okay, the things that I love in comics are as good as they are when I watch the movie. And of course, I say I saw this comic. I didn't actually read the comic and appreciate it till I was older. But my dad had the issues, and I would just flip through it, looking at the art, going like, "Oh my god, that's so cool!" So
that's a
it
way
was
to
my
do
first nerdgasm.
That's fair. That's very fair. See, I didn't really have anybody into this stuff, so like I don't know. I'm just kind of known amongst our group as the guy that kind of found everything late and got really into it. But I guess I'll get like the my most obvious one out of the way. It's on the thumbnail. It's Watchmen. I mean, like, so it's funny because the first time I read Watchmen, I was a teenager and I didn't quite get it. I thought it was good, but I didn't really understand it. You know, it was like, and I also think I read it at the wrong time. Like at that point I had really only read Batman comics. I was probably 16. And obviously everybody and their moms like read Watchmen, and now like that is never ever on my recommendation list for somebody who has not read many comics.
No.
Because in order to truly appreciate it and to understand it, you have to have read comics, like a decent chunk. And also, between us, I know a lot of people that have read a lot of comics that still don't get Watchmen. So like,
yeah, dude, I was gonna say, like, I know grown ass people who have multiple versions of the book who love it and read it, but still, there's a bunch of Zack Snyders out there. Is what I'm saying. Like, there's a bunch of people I know who read Watchmen and their takeaway is, dude, Rorschach is so cool. And it's like, you totally missed the point of not only that character, but the entirety of the book.
or like, the Watchmen are all like good superheroes.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a deconstruction of everything superheroes are. But hey, you know what? I did a debate about how people don't understand Watchmen. For anybody watching this now that wants to go check that out later, go watch that. But yeah, so really Watchmen kind of found me. I fell in love with Watchmen really when I got to college. And at that point, I had read more and more and more comics. I had gone back to reread a bunch of classics, and at that point, I think I had been pulling comics for a year to 2 years, and I was just engrossed. And I remember reading it, and really, it was the second time I had read Watchmen, and I think the first time I had read it to completion, and I finally understood, or I started to understand what it was all about. And the really complex questions that it begins to pose about our society, about the concept of heroism, what that means, and the sort of psychosis or general psychology that is required of somebody to get up into a costume and fight crime, fight each other, really, because they're all kind of criminals. But really, it's it's staggering at what the work is able to do, how deliberate it is. And the more and more I get into comics and the more critical I become, and now that I'm writing my own comics, the more I fall in love with that book. I mean, just every single aspect is deliberate, it's intelligent. It tackles not only comics, but a lot of really, really, really complex social issues and political issues all in one basket. And just to give credit where credit's due too, that I don't think a lot of people do, it has some of the best colors I've ever seen in a comic book. Just everything about it is just smart. It's just smart man's comic. I mean, I knew that, oh, well, I always knew it was valid, but the thing that really confirmed it was that I was taking a British literature class and this was on the syllabus. Like,
Yeah.
that means something. Like, mind you, like, I'm at a top 20 university in the country and they're teaching Watchmen. How
Right.
beautiful is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like in general, it ends up on most lists of like the 100 greatest like works of literature, you
Mhm.
know? Like yeah, and again, like it does that thing that most great art does where like there are people, especially nowadays, they want a book that's going to tell you something.
Mhm.
But Watchmen doesn't actually tell you anything. It
Mhm.
poses questions to you that are supposed to teach you about yourself and about the way you interact with the world and way you view the world. And it's going to challenge your beliefs about what is
Mhm.
right and what is wrong. And then it leaves you to make those decisions for yourself.
Mhm.
Um, but like it's a very political book. It is a very socially minded book. And while it has statements in it, those things aren't like, this is what you should think. This is what you should believe. It's not on a soapbox. It's just like, this is the way things are. How do you feel
Mhm.
about that?
And it's also just made to make you uncomfortable. Like, it's made to make you reconsider all of these different social and political contexts in your life, even some of your personal relationships if you really dig into it. And what I love is just is that it's so, the reason that Watchmen is the greatest comic book of all time, or widely regarded as the greatest comic book of all time, is because it, better than anything I have ever read, knows and utilizes the medium in order to tell its story in the most efficient and effective way possible. It's just so conscious of everything that it's doing, from layout to color to expression, and the list goes on. And it's like, it's sort of like I mean, I feel like in order for it to properly deconstruct what it's trying to deconstruct in superheroes, like, that there's a love for superheroes, but in order to love something, or in order in order to really, really love something, you have to know it, right? Like, if you love something blindly, it's not a real love. And so, in order for Alan Moore to make this, that he loves these superhero comics that he's deconstructing. It's like the ultimate guide, or it's like what they say with the best chef. Like, if you can deconstruct the dish and present it deconstructed, then you're a chef. Alan Moore loves and knows superhero comics. Therefore, he deconstructed it and used that as his vehicle in order to create something and evoke such a response. I mean, honestly, I almost hate talking about Watchmen on these shows because I can never properly do it justice. There's just so much to it, but I mean, it's excellent. It's so good. And again, like, if anybody's watching this that hasn't read Watchmen or read Watchmen and doesn't understand it, go read more comics and then go read Watchmen again, because it takes a lot, I think, to really access the text, and to really admire what it does. Because I think all too often people are like, oh, well, this guy that's smarter than me told me that I should like Watchmen, so I like Watchmen. And first of all, like what you like. These we're having this conversation about the comics that made us because they made us. They don't necessarily have to make you. And I think that's kind of also an important disclaimer that I could have or should have made at the beginning of the conversation, but didn't. So,
Yeah, I mean, fiction is so subjective, you know? Like I know people who don't care for Watchmen, and I could say that's because they don't understand Watchmen, but the truth of the matter is, every time, like I try to reread it every year or so, because I find that the older I get and the more life experience I get, the different baggage I bring to the book. And
mhm.
with that baggage I bring, I begin to understand more things about the book and about myself than I did on the previous read. So yeah, like it is a highly analytical book in a lot of ways, and it is a book that is doing a lot, and that's not for everybody, you
Mhm.
know. And it's also one of those books that I understand some people who are like, well, it feels dated, and that's really because in the same year Watchmen came out, Dark Knight Returns comes out, And while Alan Moore and Frank Miller with both those works, they wanted to make something that showed people everything comics could be.
Mm.
And the message the comic industry got from that was, this is what every book should be. And then they misunderstood and extrapolated that, and then we got the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I mean, this for better or for worse defined multiple generations of people, and it, obviously the fact that it's on my list continues to define me today. This is the thing that I read and I aspire to, knowing that I will never ever be good enough to write a Watchman, but looking at the insane level of craft that goes into this book on every level, right? Because you get this as a filmmaker. If you want to be a good director, you also have to be a solid writer, and you also have to be an okay actor, and you also have to be a fine DOP, and this and that and the other thing. If you want to be a truly great comic book writer, you have to know comic book art, colors, inking, lettering, everything. Even if they're not your expertise, there needs to be an awareness. And the thing is that not only does Alan Moore bring that, but the team themselves are just running at the top of their game. I mean, I know some people that might have a different favorite work of Dave Gibbons. This is my favorite work of Dave Gibbons, down to the deliberation. Obviously, Alan Moore, I mean, literally from early on in the book, like as Dan Dryberg walks out of the former Night Owl's house, there's a sign for his car garage that says, "We fix broken things," as he walks into the alley and a silhouette pours down upon him. And this really shallow, I believe, like yellow purplish light, like that one panel, there's so much to unpack. It is one panel with 9 other panels on that page and hundreds, if not thousands of panels in that book. And it does that much work.
And so it's fantastic because, there's that saying, a picture's worth of 1,000 words, but like Alan Moore takes that to heart. And with as many words as he puts on the page, because it's some pretty dense, writing, he knew that the images had to say as much, if not more.
Absolutely.
And if you've read the script for Watchmen, it's insanity, the level of detail he puts into those scripts.
Dude, I don't think they've ever released the whole script. Like,
I don't think so either.
Like, I've seen the first panel, which he wrote a whole page for the first panel in a 9-panel page. But you know what, man? I got to give Dave Gibbons a lot of credit because he had to have, because I don't think any other artist would read a script that long and go, yes, I'm going to stay on this project. Dave Gibbons had to have known that this was going to be something special, or just believed that much in Alan Moore, because that's a lot. I mean, God, the script for Watchmen is probably 3 films worth of script at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a reason we'll never get a good Watchmen movie, I say an accurate Watchmen movie. Okay. Because again, we're not talking about the Watchmen movie, but I'm just saying, like, there are some things that are unadaptable, and this is definitely one of those things. Now, the great thing about it is you can literally do 10% of Watchmen in a movie and it'll be a fun, cool movie, because that's how dense and how good everything in it is.
Right.
But it is one of those things that can only exist in comics.
Yeah, it's and Alan Moore, he's been going on the record and saying, like, he thinks Watchmen is unadaptable, which I generally agree with. In order to do an adaptation of high fidelity, it's impossible on many levels. And the one where I think was obviously just most failed at in the film, without going too far into it, was that Snyder makes everybody look really cool. And that's wrong. Yeah. It's wrong. Like, I'm sorry. There's a reason Night Owl's costume looks, excuse my French, fucking stupid in the comic book, because he's kind of a weirdo. Like, actually, he is a weirdo. He only fights crime because it makes him feel like the temporary alpha male and gets his libido going, you know? So and that sort of matriculates in various ways and in different ways throughout the rest of the cast. But I mean, I could beat Watchmen over the head, and keep talking about it very poorly. But I'm just gonna leave you guys with that. Corey, man, what's your number two?
So this probably should be the last one I talk about, because what I'm about to say now, this is literally my favorite comic book. It's the comic I've read the most, but in truth, I actually have more to say with my next pick about my next pick. So I'm gonna go with this one, but it's The Crow by James Obar from
Okay.
1989. And this was a book that, like, obviously I'd seen the movie, I loved the movie, and finally I got my hands on the book when I was probably like 13 or 14. And it was one of those moments where, like, I was, again, like I said, I find that a lot of times the media you need will find you at the moment you need it the most. And while I definitely had it not experienced loss on the level that, like, I have as an adult, I'd already lost quite a few people, and I was in that place where, like, because of hormones and just the general changes of my life, I was very angry and I was very emotional. And this book is pure emotion. Unlike the movie, it doesn't rely on a narrative. Like, whenever you talk about expressionism as an art form, I have seen very few works that are as complete in terms of expressionism as this book. And again, it's a black and white book, so you would think, like, without the use of color and stuff, that would really limit you. But because it's dealing with these, like, deep-seated elements of rage and sorrow, like the black and white works so perfectly, and he uses a range of different black and white techniques to really shade those different emotions differently. I love the fact that the book is non-linear in terms of narrative. Like, it does progress in a linear fashion, but we are just getting these vignettes essentially with each issue. It's like, here is sadness personified, here is rage personified, here is vengeance personified. And the artwork in it is beautiful. It's graphic and violent, but the thing I love about James Obar as an artist is, especially, like, at the time this book was coming out, so many artists, and then, even today, so many artists learn to draw from reading comic books, especially comic book artists. They learn to draw from reading comics. So what you're seeing is an exaggeration of the human form. But J. Obar wasn't allowed to read comics in his house when he was a kid, and he wasn't even allowed to draw in his house when he was a kid, because he was a foster kid, and most of his foster families didn't think it was worth anything. That's not going to take you anywhere. So literally, he would go to the art museum and sit there all day drawing pictures of classical art, like sculptures of David and all those kind of things. So what you end up finding with James Obar's art is this really beautiful blending of real anatomy and real, like, weighty shapes and forms mixed with just enough caricature work that he's able to, hit that. It's one of those things, like they say in, how to make comics or how to draw comics. It's like, the more expression and the more detail you put into an image, the better it looks, but also it loses a little bit of the translatability across the board. So you find a lot of bodies in the book that are very highly detailed and highly realistic, with faces that are much more characteristic of kind of cartoons, so that you can get those very emotionally impactful expressions just hitting home very, very hard. The other thing that I love in the book, and it's actually been a critique that's been thrown at the book, is that the character model for the main character of Eric shifts a lot. But that is because of the expressionism at play. In scenes where he is sad, he's drawn more lean and more small and more kind of sad and pathetic in a lot of ways, and also more feminine to a certain degree, because especially when the time this book's coming out, those kind of, like, the more meeker emotions are kind of viewed in more of a feminine light. But then there are other scenes where he is in full-on vengeance mode, where he is drawn not like the Hulk, but more like akin to, like, Superman or Batman or something, really invoking almost like Frankenstein size, where there's specifically in the book, there's a scene where he shoots morphine into his heart, carves a crown of thorns into his chest, and then walks into the street and beats 30 gangsters to death with his bare hands for the most part. And in that sequence, he is just this big, hulking form that is the personification of rage and vengeance. But even having said that, the art is just glorious and beautiful, and every panel encapsulates the hard-hitting emotion that he's going for with such perfection that it was just one of those books that, like, I'd been reading comics for most of my life, but at that point when this book found me, I'd kind of moved away from them. And it was one of those moments where I read this book and I was like, I didn't know comics could be this. You know, I didn't know comics could affect me in this way, because it really was the first time I read a comic where halfway through the book I had to put it down because they were just like tears streaming out of my eyes to the point where I couldn't see the pages anymore.
Yeah, I feel like the love for this book really comes from people when they're depending on when they found it. And I think that's when it resonates with people, because I actually just read The Crow for the first time no more than a couple of months ago. And I couldn't really connect with it, honestly. And I think it's in due part because I can appreciate how raw that story was. It's pure raw emotion. And for a lack of a better term, it was almost a James Obar fantasy. Like, he wished he could wreak vengeance upon the people that took the love of his life from him. And he manifested that throughout The Crow.
Yeah.
And I actually think that, and this might be sacrilege to say, I think that I would be really interested in seeing him reapproach it now that he's honed his craft. Because for me, looking upon The Crow as now an editor and a writer of comic books, the thing that keeps me from accessing it so much or because you can tell that in the beginning he's so new, he's so green to the medium, and it's also something you can appreciate, because by the time you get to that final book, his vision for this story, both visually, textually, and the sort of excess medium that he's pulling in is a lot tighter, and that's something that I've definitely come to appreciate. It's one of those things where, again, I think it entirely depends on when you found it and how you found it, because this is one of those things that, somebody had recommended to me, and somebody who would very much agree with you and is very passionate about this book. And when I read it, I was just in such a sort of state of normalcy. I didn't find this book when I needed it. And therefore I don't know, I couldn't emotionally connect to it, but I can definitely appreciate how you and a lot of other people really kind of hold this book close to the chest.
Yeah, and like The Crow is also one of those books that, like, it's not for everybody. That's and like I find that, again, people who've experienced loss, especially loss that is without reason, loss that is random, that is like inexplicable, have an easier time connecting to it. And I also, like you were saying, like the book starts off very loose. This is something that he didn't write, like he didn't sit down and plot it out. He sat down and just started making this thing as a way to like purge these emotions from himself. And as much as, like, looking back, he says that actually was very unhealthy for him. It caused him to actually live in this state more. But as you get to the end of the book, like you're saying, things become tighter, and you can see him getting a more strong grasp on understanding his own emotions. But again, it's a very personal thing, and it's not the kind of book that is made for everybody or even intended for everybody. So like, it's one of those books that I love it and adore it. And like I said, it's my absolute favorite book. But if someone's like, oh, I didn't really feel it, I didn't really get it, I'm like, that's valid too. Like, I get that. It is like most great works of art. It's subjective, and and mileage may vary.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it too was admittedly expectation. Like when this had come to me, somebody had literally said, this is like as good as Sandman, and I read it and I was like, I mean, they're both really pale and have black hair, so in which case,
Yeah.
yes. But like they're so different,
Yeah,
and
no.
I think when I went into this expecting this really literary complicated thing that is going to make me meditate on a simple line, for an hour, and The
Right.
Crow is just not that. It is, you read it and you experience it and you feel Eric's pain, and you like, it's the ultimate catharsis,
Yes.
reading something like that. And one, the expectation led me in one direction, but two, I wasn't in need of that level of catharsis at the time. But I think now I would be really interested to see James Obar, now that he's really more fully considered his emotions and now that he's bettered his crafts. I would love to see him reapproach it and maybe do, I mean, I don't even know what to call it, but essentially look at his meditations on that original story now that he's been able to process those emotions and perhaps provide a little bit more conclusive insight to those feelings.
Yeah, I mean, for years they've been talking about remaking the original Crow movie, and I was just talking to somebody on Twitter about it today that, like, for years I've been saying, no, what you need to do is do an animated movie and use the comic and the live action movie and find somewhere in the middle and get James Obar to come in and help direct you on that, use his character designs, and let him basically tell the hybrid version of that story that he now, as he's come to terms with all the pain, not from just the original book, but all the pain that came out of the original movie after he became so close to Brandon Lee. Let him take those things and work them into a new narrative that is the best of all things with the level of balance that he now has.
Yeah. I think
I actually do agree with you. Like, yeah, it would be really, really interesting. And as a fan, I don't know if I'd want him to do the exact same story, but doing another take on it in another form, I think would be really awesome.
Yeah, that definitely be something that I think I would be interested in, because I think now, I don't know, maybe it's just at this point in time in my life, I'm emotionally a lot more interested to see questions posed and an approach to tackling those questions. And when I read The Crow, I think it was very approach heavy. It was all about approaching the topic at hand rather than really begging questions. It was, there is pain. We will resolve the pain by any means necessary. But I will say, actually, one of my favorite things narratively about The Crow is the use of the actual physical, well, the supernatural bird itself as the sort of mouthpiece for the afterlife. And there's that moment maybe between the first and second book where it's him and I think Eric talking on the train.
Yeah.
Where honestly, I wasn't caring for that first book at all until that moment. It was that very moment where I was like, now I think that I can connect to this book.
Right on, dude. Yeah. And again, like I said, I love the book. I get why it doesn't work for some folks, and that's also why I'm talking about it in the middle as opposed to my last pick. My last pick, has a lot. I have a lot of similar emotions attached to it, but it's a very different beast and operates in a very different fundamental way. So yeah.
I think that's also part of what makes this conversation great, is because so far the first two comics that you picked are comics that I would never pick. And that's like, it's just interesting to get somebody's perspective and see what shaped them. Because, I mean, although Watchmen is my favorite comic of all time, like the rest of these books aren't all books that are like my top. This isn't my top three. These are books that formed me and that I love and I might also think are great, but it's not necessarily like, this is definably, I'll tell you right now, is just not my top three. They're just
right on.
right now. So I do, that's, yeah, it's part of what makes this conversation so cool. But Mark McKeever says Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow in both Superman 423 and Action 583 is what got me into reading comics. Wow.
Nice.
I'm curious because Mark, I know you've been reading comics for a long time. How old were you when you got into that? Because I feel like if you were like many people and accessed comics like as a juvenile or even beforehand, like that's got to be some pretty complex reading, I think. I don't know. I think that Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow is just kind of dripping with insight. And
Oh
it's one
yeah.
of those books that I am really glad that I waited to read.
Yeah, it's a really interesting book because it straddles that line of like the modern age of comics with like deep introspective insights and also kind of the campy fun of what came before. Like
Mhm.
it straddles that line so perfectly and so interestingly. It's like Alan Moore's doing really interesting introspective stuff, but at the same time he's like, but don't forget these are a bunch of silly assholes in tights.
That's fair. That's very fair. Let's see. Mark says he was actually 15 for Superman 423 off the 7-Eleven comic rack. What a way to find it, huh?
Yeah.
BT Production says the New Mutants Epic Collection Volume 1 got me into comics. That's
Okay.
interesting. That's the early why am I tripping on his name? Uh I don't know why I'm blanking on it right now. I'm so brain dead.
What? Not Liefeld.
No, not Liefeld.
No.
Wasn't that Claremont and Sienkiewicz?
I think some of it might have been. I don't know. I wasn't as much as I loved X-Men when I was a kid. New Mutants wasn't something that I was quite as into.
Hmm.
It's something that I've gone back and read more of and appreciated more as I've gotten older.
Hmm.
But I can't say that it's one of those like cornerstone books. I definitely understand why it's something that could be engrossing to someone as an entry point into comics, though.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, that's super rad. I always love hearing what got people into comics. For me, uh, my second pick, I think if anybody's really watched my channel for a good amount of time, you'd be able to pick up that this was eventually coming. It's Batman: The Court of Owls. Those first two volumes of the New 52 were responsible for making me, a Wednesday warrior at the comic book store. And I only wanted to put one Batman book on this list because I didn't want to oversaturate it because a lot of my early comic book experience is Batman. And there's plenty of good stuff. I mean, it was Grant Morrison's Batman that got me into comics, but this is what got me to religiously dive into comics in the way that I did head first. And what I liked about it is that when I was starting to get in, the idea of continuity actually fascinated me. I loved the idea that there were, at the time, 70 something years of Batman history to roll through, and that it all kind of culminates in this big, beautiful thing. And especially having read this after Grant Morrison's, I mean, like Morrison just made sense of a lot of really hokey golden and silver age concepts, and just made them complex storytelling devices and obstacles for Bruce. And Court of the Owls was just like, you knew when you were reading this for the first time that this was going to kick off a Batman run that would be incredible, that it was going to be defining. I would make the argument that the Scott Snyder Batman run is the best Batman run we've seen in the last 10 years.
Oh yeah.
Head over heels. But the Court of the Owls was like, not only did he have at the time, harrowing weight of restarting the Batman title for the first time, but he created a new villain. He made it feel fresh. And I think the idea that the Court of the Owls have been around since the beginning of Gotham is probably the second best retcon in all of superhero comics, aside from Parallax and what Jeff Johns did with Parallax. But
Yeah.
I think, I've never, ever, ever read a superhero comic book where somebody could successfully make a villain feel like they were established before they were actually created.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. And I felt like the Court of the Owls challenged Batman in such an interesting way and pulled the rug out from under him uh, in a way that I don't think I'd seen a villain do in a long time, right? Because when you get to this, for the most part, Dick had been Batman for a long time. So you're seeing things that challenge Dick that didn't really challenge Bruce, and you're seeing challenges that are very specific to Dick. And Bruce had come back to do Batman Inc., which was its own beast. But when you do this, it just feels like it really presents a level of connective tissue that exists throughout all of Batman's continuity. And, one of the biggest and most difficult criticisms of Batman stories now are like, he's the smartest man on the planet. He's beaten everybody. He has a contingency for everybody. How do you really present a challenge for him that feels organic and satisfying? Well, you basically find out that one of his greatest villains have existed under his nose for forever.
Yeah.
And it was an oversight that he made because he didn't trust his instinct as a child. And it's great. And it was also my first exposure to Greg Capullo. And I still think Greg Capullo's Batman is arguably some of the best work of his career, if not the best work of his career. It's just a brilliant book, man.
Yeah, dude. Like, I agree 100%. I also think that, like, I think one of the things that really helps that book is and I think Snyder's even said this, like, this wasn't a story that was originally intended for New 52. It was just what he wanted to do next after Black Mirror. And then New 52 happened, and he was like, okay, I'll play ball. Like, I'll add all the things that make it New 52-ish. But the story is predicated on Batman being the icon that we know. And it uses all of that both to the book's betterment, but also to Batman's detriment. It's like his ego is one of the things that gets in the way of him right out of the gate, like putting up the best fight against the court. And it's like that whole idea, like you were saying, of like, he's beaten so many people and he's got a contingency for everything and all this kind of stuff. And like his whole thought process of like, well, if they were real, I would have discovered it when I was a child. Like, that is the mindset of a Batman who has done all the things that Batman has done. And it really takes that idea we have of Batman and builds into the story a way of being like, yeah, but he's still a man. He's still fallible. You know, he is this big iconic figure, who can fight Superman and can fight Predator and can do all these things. But at the end of the day, he's a person. And like, he has his own blind spots, and it uses that just so expertly and really cuts to the core of the character in the way that very few Batman stories are able to do. The other thing, like you're saying, Greg Capullo's art is fantastic in that book. And Greg Capullo, in my mind, is the guy who, like, you think that the iconic imagery of a specific character, and then Greg Capullo is like, yeah, here you go. And you're like, holy crap. Same thing on Spawn. Like, Todd McFarlane's drawn Spawn for so long, and people are like, oh, it's so cool, it's iconic. And then Greg Capullo comes in to the point where now even Todd McFarlane says that when you think of Spawn, the image you see in your mind is Greg Capullo's Spawn, Yeah. And he even does a thing. There are maybe 5 books in the world that don't annoy me when they do the thing where they make you turn the book.
Turn it.
Yeah. And this is one of them. This is probably in my top 3 where I'm like, it works so well.
Yeah.
Because it's not just done to be cool. It's not just done for flair. Like, it serves a narrative and a character function that without it, the story would not have the same hard-hitting effect that it does.
Yeah. And what I love is that this story effectively, it's smart enough to take Batman's greatest weapon and turn it against him. His knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. That's what makes Batman so great. And what to me makes this so successful at just reopening his core wound, and why I think it's such a satisfying read and a real triumph for Bruce when he does beat the Court of the Owls, is realizing that, one, it's taking something that he loves in Gotham City and using that to attack Bruce, right? The thing that he's given up his entire life for is attacking him.
Yeah.
And it just sets this really raw precedent for him. And I think that, this is probably the last mainstream Batman run, it started with this, that I think actually taught Bruce a lesson, a valuable lesson, right? Oh man, it's so good. And I love that it creates an insecurity for him that he didn't have before. Right?
Yeah.
Usually when writers do that, it's inorganic or it comes out of nowhere. But what Scott Snyder does in this book, and this is what made him for a long time my favorite writer in comics, not now, but for a long time, was that he was able to take Batman's greatest strength and use that to cut him open and almost make a weakness for him that didn't exist before. And that takes balls. That takes big balls for a character that is so iconic and that has been around for as long as it has. And just, also just metaphorically what it has to say about the predatory world around us. And also I think that's kind of why I like Nocterra so much, because in some ways it's kind of presenting some similar themes to Court of Owls, right? Just about what all of the evil and the bad intent that exists right under our nose. Plus, like, that Thrasher suit's fucking dope. On a me monkey brain, I like action level. That was cool as hell, man.
Yeah, it's cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, the only negative to come out of Court of Owls is that is the book that Snyder will always be compared to. Every work that he does. And it was so good coming out of the gate, that I know for a lot of people who even like Snyder's run, they're like, it never gets better than Court of Owls. And it's like, it's kind of hard to argue with, because if like your first story with Bruce Wayne as Batman is hailed as one of the greatest Batman stories of all time, it's hard to compete with yourself after that,
Yeah, absolutely. And there was impact value, right? Because it was Batman, the first Batman story come out of the New 52. A lot was living up to it, and it was one of the only early New 52 stories to not only reach financial success, because a bunch of them reach financial success, but massive critical appeal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's brilliant, man. And it definitely, just talking about it makes me want to reread it. I'm staring at my absolute Court of Owls right now.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm just going to make sweet I love to you after this freaking podcast. I'm just staring it down. But yeah, I mean, it does so much for Bruce. It feels like it's a part of this massive legacy of Batman stories, and is able to pull off a number of things that I don't think modern Batman has before or since then. So, and also it's like the perfect opening story in an entire thematically interconnected run. The sort of the introductory monologue about what Gotham is.
Yeah.
Not only feels like it's digestibly wrapped up at the end of this arc, but it spans the rest of the run, and it's called back to brilliantly.
Well, and there are also like key thematic elements that are set up, like the stuff Snyder does later in his run where he's like, maybe the Joker is immortal and has been around forever. If it wasn't for the fact that Batman was wrong about the Court of Owls, no one would have even considered that as a possibility, the whole Joker thing. Like, obviously it turned out to not be true, and that's for the best. But the whole idea of it, like if another writer had just done that on their own, people would have immediately been like, no, screw you. And some people were still like that. But because thematically it had been set up in Court of Owls, a lot more people were willing to go with it as an idea and be like, I want to see where this is going.
Yeah. You said it best, man. That was him at his A game. He defined Batman for my generation. I think it's honestly, my favorite two Batman runs of all time are Grant Morrison and Scott Snyder. And I think that's kind of like, I'm so fucking spoiled in a way, and it also ruined me forever. When my first two Batman runs were Grant Morrison, followed by Scott Snyder, and now we are where we are, and I'm like, everybody else is like, oh, this is cool, and then you're just me in the corner like, this is shit. Like, this is what I grew up with. And by grew up with, I mean I started reading comics when I was like 16, 17. So, but it's formative. And yeah, this is brilliant. This is the book that I look back to on how superhero comics should be, how to simultaneously be entertaining, action-packed, and deliberate. It's fucking awesome. So before I'm trying. I've been so blabbermouthed and so ineffective at actually explaining my point these last two, because I love them so much. But Corey, man, what is your number 3 comic book that made NerdScum who he is?
So it's interesting because all the books that are these, there are touchstones for me from childhood, and eventually the book goes to take on a greater meaning. And so Swamp Thing is something that as a child, and even now, I've got both the movies, which are not great, I've got the shitty 90s live action TV show, which is, despite having some amazing special effects for Swamp Thing in terms of the makeup, is just not a very good show. It's pretty bad. It's very much a product of its time. But again, as a kid, my dad had a few issues of Alan Moore's run on the Saga of Swamp Thing. And specifically the one where he goes to Gotham and basically turns Gotham into a frickin' forest because they won't release. Basically, they arrest his love interest, Abigail, because she had sex with Swamp Thing. And they refuse to let her go. And Swamp Thing shows up and he's like, oh, you won't let her go? Your city's fucked then. And then he basically hands Batman his ass. And Batman's just like...
It's such a great issue. That was one of the first times where I really dug into comics where I was like, okay, yeah. Like, where I wasn't actually upset at that.
No, because it makes total sense. And also, even though Batman gets beat, they don't play Batman as a rube. Like, he doesn't get beat because he's ineffectual. He gets beat because Swamp Thing is something so otherworldly. Now, in terms of me actually going back and reading, like, Alan Moore's run on the Saga of Swamp Thing, 6 volumes of it, I didn't actually read that thing until a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where I sat down and read through it. And now it's one of my top 3 Alan Moore books. Like, for me, I even like Swamp Thing more than I like Watchmen. Not because I necessarily think it's better, but because it plays to the things that I like. And also, it was another one of those books where I read Saga of the Swamp Thing, and for the first time in a long time, it was like, not only is this book is literally everything comics have the potential to be, but also everything that horror has the potential to be. Because again, like, it started off in, and I do actually have some notes here that I will refer to, because as much as I love the book, I'm bad with like dates, but like, it goes from 1984 about, it's arguable if he started writing it in like 82, some people say, but, and then like it ran until 1986 at the point where he started doing Watchmen, and, the art on it is done by various people that came in to do like fill-in issues, but mostly it's Steven Bissett who does the art for it, and it's very art indicative of its time, but it is absolutely perfect. But in terms of the things that make me love this book is like, again, kind of like in some ways of, like I said with The Crow, like this book is so emotional in places that it's hard to read a few issues without having to like step back and like just collect yourself. But even beyond that, when I actually started going through the run, it amazed me how separate but quintessential it is to everything in DC that would come after it. Because like we start off and talking about retconning, this book does so much retconning and does it all so expertly, just from the basis of like retconning what Swamp Thing is in the anatomy lesson, where we find out that like this isn't Alec Holland. This is a plant with delusions of being a man. And then like that crisis that comes out of that, where he realizes he was never Alec Holland, like it straddles this kind of existential horror and body horror in such a beautifully balanced way.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so good. And that's I'm not a horror guy. That's just not, I've never claimed to be. The only really high tier schlocky horror movie I've ever seen is Psycho. I never got into that stuff. It's not my jam, but I actually love reading horror now. And that brand of horror that gets to me is that existential horror, because it's a horror you can't run away from. And that's what makes it absolutely terrifying, and why, it's a brilliant pick. Like, actually, I was really close to substituting Watchmen for this because of what it accomplishes, and also because I knew people would expect me to pick Watchmen. But this is brilliant. And I mean, you said everything. Like, it's such a human book, and it's about a plant.
Yeah.
And it's so horrifying because it has so many truths about ourselves, and about the world. And like, also, I mean, it's just brilliant, man. It's a brilliant book.
Well, and again, like, it does so many things, and there are a few things I marked down because it's stuff I know, but I knew as I started talking about it, I would miss it. But, you know, when you get to the story arc of Love and Death, that is the moment where Karen Berger goes, fuck the Comic Code's authority. Do what you want to do. And like that issue, them doing that pretty much paved the way for Vertigo. Like them saying, screw that. This is something different, and it's too important to let that hamper us down. And Alan Moore just went with it, you know, and even beyond that. So yeah, we got this being the book that kind of set the precedence for Vertigo, but even beyond that, you know, it's like, hold on here. Like I said, I don't want to miss out on any of these like big things. It's like, okay, so yeah, it's the first time that they say, screw the Comics Code. We're doing whatever we want. You know, it is the first introduction of John Constantine is in this book, you know? It is also, you know, it introduces the concept of the green, and which would eventually lead to the red and the black, which now in terms of like DC cosmic stuff has become so influential and so important. Also, something that I don't know if you caught, I'm sure you did, but I knew you would love this, is that the character of Matt from Swamp Thing is the Raven from Sandman. Is Matt from Sandman.
Wow.
Yeah, like, I can't even remember his last name now. God. But yeah, the character of Matt, who's originally married to Abigail, who goes through that whole thing where like Arcane takes over his body and then he dies. After that, like once he enters the other world, he becomes the Raven that is like on Sandman's shoulder for most of, you know, a good bit of that run and everything. Also, the first mention of the dreaming is in Swamp Thing. They do the issue where Abigail basically, and it's a different concept. Gaiman fleshes it out and turns it into this whole other thing that is much more profound. But in the issue where Abigail, they basically go back and look at the very first Swamp Thing story. And Abigail is kind of in this other dimensional realm of existence where she's seeing this thing almost as if a dream. And that's where like Moore brings in the House of Mystery and all that kind of House of Secrets. And you basically, again, set up the groundwork for so much of what will be pivotal moving forward for Vertigo. And gives this whole playground a birthing place. Like, not only is it a great book that just does great things episodically, it's also just so important to what DC would become over the next few years that the importance of it can't be understated. Overstated. I'm sorry, overstated.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. I mean, that generation of comics in general is like, it's the most highly concentrated burst of quality that I think the industry has ever seen. I mean, the British invasion Like, if it didn't happen, I wouldn't like comics. I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
write comics. I wouldn't have comic book things tattooed on my arms. Like, I have a Watchman tattoo, I have a Sandman tattoo, I have Batman tattoos. None of that would have happened if things like Swamp Thing and Sandman and Hellblazer didn't inspire Vertigo.
Yeah.
And
Wasn't for
also,
Karen Berger.
dude, she's fucking brilliant, by the way. I know I shout her out in so many live streams, but like, it's so funny because even when you had interviewed me, you're like, what characters do you want to work on? And sometimes people are like, oh, if you could work with anybody in the industry, expecting me to like say an artist, right?
Yeah.
My number one answer is Karen Berger.
Oh,
My
hell yeah.
number one answer is always Karen Berger, because she just has the most brilliant eye for story. Like, you look at the people that she worked with in Vertigo, the people that she brought into American comics, the careers that she's created or helped to create, right? Even Snyder, like,
Yeah.
Snyder's Batman doesn't exist if Karen Berger didn't bring him on for American Vampire,
Yeah.
And like, I love these stories that I hear from, for example, Neil Gaiman said that his first submission for the first volume of Sandman, that first arc, Preludes
Oh,
and
yeah.
Nocturnes, she said no to it
Yeah.
because it wasn't polished enough. She said no to the first go at A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is now arguably the most literarily approved comic book single issue of all time. And she was the one that made sure it was molded into what it is today because it was too esoteric. She knew when to say no, being fully aware that these guys were geniuses, and how to best focus and curate their genius into what we know them as today. Like,
absolutely.
I don't have enough appendages to count the number of names that she helped shepherd into the comic book industry. Names that you love, that I love: Alan, Scott Snyder, Jeff Lemire, Grant Morrison. Some people like Mark Millar. I'm kind of indifferent. Steve Dillon, Brian Bolland. Like, you could keep going. You could keep going and going and going and going. And yeah, so you're going to get me started on a Karen Berger rabbit hole, but yeah, no.
Well, that's okay. Awesome. I'll transition that into like one other thing I do want to mention about Swamp Thing, because in this run, it is what the two things I want to mention last about it that are so great are the things that people often kind of forget about or leave out, which is that Swamp Thing has a tie-in to Crisis on Infinite Earths. And it is, in some respects, while I love Crisis on Infinite Earths, Alan Moore takes the premise of that and molds it into some of the most terrifying stuff in that book, where in the Swamp Thing book, where basically you actually get to see how what's happening to people as their worlds are becoming, as the reality of their worlds is unraveling. And like, that is on a existential and human level is terrifying in a way that is almost uncomprehendable. And the scope in which they play it out is so great. And then the other thing I want to mention, because this is the one that no one talks about, and it's almost something that didn't end up in the book. If it hadn't been, again, for Karen Berger, Alan Moore was basically being like, oh, I had this stupid idea. And Karen Berger's like, no, that's great. And that is the arc where after the Gotham thing, Swamp Thing gets cut out of the green. They find a frequency that can like make it so he can't just grow another body somewhere else, and they kill him. So Swamp Thing has to like reach his consciousness out beyond Earth, looking for any plant life that he can attach to the green of so he doesn't die. And you have this whole arc where he's out in outer space doing space stuff. He hooks up with Adam Strange. And also, again, it's one of those things where like, my favorite moment from that, though, is he goes to a planet and starts trying to reconfigure himself. And as he's reconfiguring himself, he is overcome with emotions that aren't his. And he doesn't understand and he can't comprehend it until he's formed enough of a consciousness he's formed enough of a physical being that can interact with his consciousness in a way that he realizes he's gone to a world where the dominant species evolved from plants.
Mm.
And as he is forming himself, he's literally taking living, sentient beings and like morphing them into part of himself and absorbing them and like killing millions in order to form himself. And it is just so terrifying and breathtaking. And the writing and the art combined together is one of those things that like it's almost unconceivable, you know? It's one of those things that like very few times have I ever seen a comic that hit me that hard. Because you want Swamp Thing to live. You're so invested in him as a character and this journey that he's on that then when this starts happening, you're like, oh my God, like, you know, all of a sudden Swamp Thing is committing genocide, but not by like a force of like, not by an act of will. It's by an act of survival. And it's like, it's so morally complex. And the way that the character processes and deals with that is so complex that, again, like I literally don't have the words to describe why it is as profound a moment as it is.
Well, I think that a part of it, and you definitely approached it there in saying that it moralizes things that I think we wouldn't otherwise moralize, and it demoralizes things that I think as a Western culture that we do moralize. And I think that's part of what makes it so great is because it recontextualizes human wants and desires, right, into the mind of a plant.
Right.
And it takes very basic survival instincts that are primitive and animalistic and perhaps natural and applies them to the human condition. Like this is the I'm going to ride this train because this is the most succinct thing I've said all day. But that's what makes Swamp Thing so great. And it's all like, let's also give credit where credit's due. Like Stephen Bissette and the number of other artists that work on it just brilliantly capture the intricacies of what I just mentioned there, that really interesting dynamic that you literally just won't find anywhere else. And the last thing that I can even say on this are that all of my favorite writers talk about how formative Alan Moore's Swamp Thing is for them. And so it just speaks volumes about how this book is part of the presiding consciousness of writers that I would say are some of the best at what they do.
Yeah.
You know?
And you know, I'm not going to go on much longer about it. The only other thing I want to say about the book is like there are issues in his run of Swamp Thing that aren't the best, you know? But what I will say about it is there are very few books that are as fearless and as without boundaries and without limits as his run on Swamp Thing. He really gave himself license to do anything. And because of it, the world of comics is richer for it.
No, you're totally right, man. It's inspirational. It is, I mean, again, it's Alan Moore. Like it's just Alan Moore being existential and really just pulling at your heartstrings, or should I say at your little vine strings with something like this. It's just brilliant. And before I get into my final pick of the night, I do want to mention something that I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't. I am kickstarting a comic book right now. For those of you watching, it is the second issue to my sci-fi noir comic book series called Area 51, The Helix Project. We're in our last week. So if you haven't gotten a chance to back it, please consider doing so. Like the reason I am so scatterbrained is because I have been sleeping, eating, and breathing this book, the production of this book, making sure it exists, making sure it is a worthwhile story that I think will be worth somebody's time, their money, their energy, their consciousness. And if you haven't read issue one, issue one is so readily available if you just read the Kickstarter. And all of the comics come signed at no extra charge. Everything is made on thick premium paper. I've done everything I could as an aspiring creative, as a fan, to create something that I think is going to be worth your time and your money. So with that being said, if this doesn't hit its funding goal, this doesn't get made, right? Like issue 1's been printed. Fortunately, I have that, but this would be a huge stopgap for me. And literally this funding goal that I have on the Kickstarter is literally just so that I don't lose all of this money myself. Like the goal is literally just to break even. I don't even care about making money on this book. I just want to get it out there into the world. And so there's a link in the description. I ask that if this video, anything I've ever made for free on YouTube, has given you any value, please consider giving this a look. This is me being the humblest I can be and asking you to give it a try. And I know times are tough. If you can't spring it, please share it around. Show somebody you think might be interested. Give it a look. I promise I've presented it in the best way I possibly can. Corey's read both issues of the book, so I guess, I don't know, I'll let him say anything he might have to say on it, but it's hard. It's hard for me to talk about something I made to this capacity. All I can ask is that you check it out.
Yeah, as Trevor said, I've checked out the first 2 issues, and hopefully from the things I've said in this video, people will understand the standards by which I judge things. And the first issue is really awesome. It is almost a perfect setup for an indie book. It gives you everything that you need to know and nothing that you don't. And then the second issue builds on that in a really awesome way. The artwork is absolutely awesome. His artist on this book has been in the industry for 20 years, been working on stuff for 20 years. His mastery of the human form, of anatomy, is excellent, which is probably one of my biggest critiques with most comics in terms of the artwork. The shots and panel layouts they've chosen to use really help emphasize those moments. And as he was saying, like, there's like a week left on the crowdfunding campaign. At this point, I think maybe 6 days left. Mm-hmm. And there are some really awesome perks on there, including like getting yourself drawn in as a murder victim of one of the characters, which is just absolutely awesome. And he's also got like t-shirts and obviously copies of the book that are signed. Like, it's a lot of cool stuff. And if you believe that literally anything we've said in this video is valid, there it goes right there. Yeah. God, I love that cover. That is so great. If you think that anything we've said in this video is valid, then definitely at least go check out the Kickstarter. If you can't, donate, then definitely do, share it and all that kind of stuff. And if you want to know more about the book, me and Trevor did a interview over on my channel, which, you can definitely go check out. It's just NerdScum on YouTube. It's about a 45-minute interview where he goes really in depth into like the story as well as, his inspirations about it. So yeah, check those things out and definitely give it a look. It's well worth your time.
And if you guys want to watch it too, there's a link to Corey's channel in the description. And if you click the Kickstarter link, read through it. In the update section, I also plugged our conversation in there as well. This story means a lot to me. If anybody watches the channel, you know that I'm very critical. I'm very particular. And I'm bringing every ounce of that and more so to this book, right? You think I'm critical on other people's books? You should see me stewing over my scripts. I'm taking all my inspirations from it. If you want to learn more, click the link in the campaign. I feel like it gives you everything you need to know about this book going into it. Also, check out the interview with Corey, because he asks all of the best writerly questions that anybody would want to know about this book. And yeah, I poured myself into this. And I just, I want you to read it. I've done my best to make this a highly affordable product. It's what you would pay at the big 2, but you actually get more content. There are no ads. It's printed on high quality paper. I've done everything I can. I've literally broken my back to bring this story, and I'm not even asking to profit off of this. I just want it to exist out there into the world.
Right.
So,
Yo, I apologize, but someone's been knocking on my door. I need to go yell at someone real fast. Why don't you give folks like just the elevator pitch like you kind of did in my video, just let them know what the basic plot, and characters are, and I'll be right back. I'm so sorry, dude.
you're good, man. No stress.
Go yell at someone.
You go deal with that person. Deal with them all good. But yeah, if you click the link in the description, you will be brought to this page, which I will throw up on the screen for you now. Let's see here. All right, yeah. So there's a trailer that you can watch that has a both sort of dramatic and informative portion. A little bit about the book itself. The story shows off a lot of the artwork. Here are the covers to issue 2. The first of which is very Jack Kirby inspired. The second one is a lot more sort of metaphorical and indicative of what's happening in the book. You also have the option here, like I said, to add on copies of issue 1. A little bit more about the story, a little bit of catch up for you if you didn't read issue 1 without spoiling the entirety of the issue. Promo art from this one, including pages of script to give you a good idea of my sort of thought process. I mean, look at this art, man. If I don't sell myself, I will sell my art team because they are freaking brilliant. I'm doing my best to combine all of my influences from comics, from prose, from film to create this for you. And I'm super uncomfortable talking about this book as a parent by my blabbering. So please make me feel like this really uncomfortable self-promotion is worth it and give it a look. There are also multiple bits of coverage on the arc, on the book, on the first issue from other people. If you don't believe me, some of the cool rewards that you can pick up by backing the project, including all high quality merchandise. Like literally this material is dummy soft. Anybody that picked one up will comment on that. I worked in retail. I managed a retail store for years. It was the last of which was $2 million store. I'm bringing even a very basic eye for design, for texture, for material to making these rewards. And that's not even the actual comic itself. Like Corey said, you have opportunities to get drawn into the book. You could be this guy getting murdered and you get featured on 2 pages, this splash and the one prior. And I've been talking to Corey because Corey has read the second issue. I actually think this is one of my favorite scenes in the book, to be quite frank. So I think this is the highest honor I could possibly give you, getting drawn into the scene, to be quite honest. Amongst other really cool things. So please give it a look. I would super appreciate it. It would absolutely break my heart if this train kind of stopped here. And like now that the world's getting back to normal, you pick up the book. I'd love to come to your city, meet you at a convention, and just be kind of more in touch with the comic book community. But please give it a look. If you can't, share it around and feel free to tag me so that I can thank you, because I am profusely thankful. If you've already backed this campaign, I can't stress this enough. I fucking love you because, like you can't not, for somebody that is ready to have this sort of open expressionistic dialogue about something that you care about, because that's what it is to me, right? When I create something like this, it is an expressionistic conversation that I'm having with the reader about things that matter to me, that I'm wrapping up in sci-fi, conspiracy, and murder, amongst other things. So give it a look. I'm super uncomfortable talking about it, so I'm gonna stop at that. So yeah, I'll get into my third book, and I feel like my third book for the night is one that you would never expect, because I really wanted to throw something that this is the comics that made us, and I think I'd be remiss to not talk about something that's a lot more contemporary, that I think is very indicative of where I'm at now in my comic book reading career, in my newfound comic book writing career. If you guys want to keep that going, buy that book, because I'd like to have a career. And that's Blue and Green by Ram V. And there's a very good reason for those of you that haven't seen it why I actually interviewed Rom last week, and it is because books like this. Now I actually have it right here because I've been rereading it. I had some really bad writer's block today, and I just kind of wanted to read something that inspires me, and this is certainly it. It is an urban musical horror. Jazz is scary, and it's named after one of my favorite Miles Davis songs, so that's an easy way to win. But it's absolutely brilliant. It is very much, it's very clear that Rom is inspired by the likes of Alan Moore and the British Invasion. It brings that element of existential horror that I think is so successful at actually scaring us into an emotional response. It's all grounded in a love of music, which that's what that was my first job, like making music, gigging, selling and recording. And I've also said, if you guys haven't watched it, there's a old throwback video on Comic Boom's channel where we literally talked about how comics are the jazz of literature. A horror comic book about jazz, people. Come on. So yeah, I think it just poses some really interesting existential questions. The art inside by Anand RK is so brilliantly Dave McKean meets Eastern influence, and just captures the first of all, it captures the soul of the setting. It captures this immense existential struggle to try to grasp a life that we never really had. I mean, it's brilliant. It's so good. Go buy this book too while you're buying mine. But it's largely inspiring as to who I am currently as a reader and as a comic book writer.
Right on. Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't actually had a chance. It's one of those that's been on my list, but I actually haven't had a chance to check this one out. So unfortunately, I don't have any big insights into it from my side, but doesn't Rom V also have, isn't he currently doing like one of the Batman Black and White stories, or he has something coming out from DC like this week, doesn't he?
I don't know if he's doing a black and white story. So he actually just started a Swamp Thing run, which actually, if you read the Future State stuff, you can tell it's heavily inspired by Alan Moore, because
Okay, cool.
he does some kind of, I wouldn't even call them subtle. He does some callbacks to the anatomy lesson, which I think was just well contextualized. He's doing Catwoman. He's doing Justice League Dark backup, but
That's what it was.
That doesn't deserve to be behind a Bendis story. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
It deserves to have its own book. But what this is very much like, this was the reason that I got into Rom V. This is the reason why I invited him on the channel, because it is such a level of pensive. It's such a creatively pensive approach to making comics. This creative team are just working on such an intuitive level where every panel matters. Every little moment, every little aspect and quality to the book is indicative of something regarding character, regarding theme, regarding plot. Although it's like, this isn't a super plot heavy book. It's just so deeply personal and terrifying, and has a lot to express. And that transmission of emotion and information, I think, is what makes this book so sort of invasive in a way. I think it's so relatable. Especially to, I think, like our sort of generation of people who were told that we needed to be a certain thing as an adult. Right? Like, we needed to be at a certain place doing a certain thing, and we're not. And we're eulogizing like a life we never have had or never will have. And that's like both cathartic and terrifying at the same time. It's a brilliant book. And first of all, it's beautifully bound. Like, this just feels good in hand, which is like, I don't know. I feel like as I've become a vet, I've indoctrinated myself into the veteran status of comic book reader. That sort of like tangible hand porn is just what I love about reading a trade. So yeah, it's worth getting, and is just inspiring to me. I don't know. I definitely got a little bit mentally thrown off course after talking about my own book and begging on my digital hands and knees for you people to give it a look. So yeah, I mean, frankly, I think that there were like millions of books that Corey and I probably could have picked to talk about tonight. And this is certainly something that I think that we could probably have under different contexts. You know, the Marvel books that made us, the DC books that made us.
Yeah,
In fact, we should do that. We should make a different series and go
I'm
through
down.
books from different publishers. But
The licensed books that made us.
yeah, man, there's just a lot. So, these also aren't like necessarily our top 3 books of all time. These aren't all you need to know is that these books sort of amalgamate approximately who we are as artists, as readers, as creatives in general. And yeah, and I think what I love about this conversation is we're very different in our approach. The things that we picked have sort of overlying similarities that are connectable, but also like they're so very different. I picked my last book was something you never read. Your first book was something I never read. Yeah, my second book was something we both loved, but your second book was something that I couldn't connect to. And that's what I think makes this conversation so great. So I think if anything, this just tells you, go out, read comics,
Yeah, you never know. As I said, I find that a lot of times with people who really love fiction, whether it be movies or comic books or novels, oftentimes subconsciously you are drawn to the thing you need the most at that time. And so for every person, the books that made them, the comics that made them, are going to be completely different things. And that's the beautiful thing about fiction, is that it can speak to so many different people on so many different levels. And when you really love something, you take it in and it becomes a part of your identity, whether you want it to or not,
Absolutely.
And it influences you in ways and hopefully makes you a better version of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stories are the greatest connective tissue that I think mankind could ask for. And it comes in so many different forms. We talk about comics because it's a common love. And what makes comics so great are that they're so different from anything else. I often say that comic books are this beautiful amalgamation of cinema and prose and poetry and general visual art all kind of wrapped into one package. And it's a special thing. It's a special medium, and it's able to tell stories that you wouldn't be able to absorb, in such a profound way if it weren't in comics. And yeah, it's just this was a solid conversation. I'm thankful to everybody for watching. I'm extra thankful to anybody that picks up the Helix project and decides to give it a look. Corey, I know you have some creative projects that you're working on that the people should definitely know about and keep an eye out for. So what are they? Where can they follow you and your creative endeavors?
Right on. So in general, like I've got the YouTube channel NerdScum where I talk about all kinds of different stuff over there, from action figures to movies to comic books, lots of comic books. Here recently I've been talking a lot about the Crossed franchise because that's what people want to hear about, apparently. All of a sudden,
people want.
Right. It's what the people want, so it's what I'm doing. But also I am a filmmaker. Just last year in December, we shot a feature film called Vice Mares that I wrote and co-star in, and that's moving into post-production right now. There's another film that's in the works right now that I'm trying to do, and I talk about all that stuff on my channel, but you can also find me on Facebook as, again, either Corey Ari or NerdScum. If you're interested, yeah, it's NerdScum, Corey W.R.E. Like, that's the title. It's like a pimp named Slickback or a Tribe Called Quest, So yeah, and then also I'm on Twitter under Corey Ari, and then on Instagram under NerdScum, and I believe Trevor's got all the links for those. I've also got a TikTok, but it's really embarrassing, and I'm way too old to have a TikTok, so just ignore that one. But yeah, if you guys are interested, definitely check that stuff out. I'd love to have you.
Yeah, you definitely go check Corey out. Super unique voice when it comes to his comics, his writing, his approach to even discussing toys. Great guy, all around, freaking incredible creative mind. That I mean, love talking story with this guy. And if I say it, it's true, because I'll shit on anybody that whose work rubs me the wrong way. So the fact that I give him such high marks, is completely honest. So links in the description below to pretty much all of his shenanigans. So follow him, keep up to date with Vice Mayors. I know I'm stoked. I have 2 of Corey's films sitting up. They actually replaced a Greg Capullo Batman figure on my shelf. So, ultimate compliment. Go check them out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember we were talking when I did that. And I literally opened my shelf, beat Batman over the head with his movie Enchiridion, and just put the movie there. But yeah, so go check Corey out if you haven't already. Subscribe to my channel as well, Dark Knight Nation, for in-depth comic book conversation where hopefully I'm slightly more coherent than I was tonight. Mind is on that comic book. Also, analytical comic book reviews that I think are different than what you're really going to find most elsewhere. And an overwhelming love for comics. So follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Links are in the description below. And yeah, hope you consider giving my little picture book a chance. Thank you guys for joining us. Corey, thank you for sitting down and shooting the shit.
Yeah, you're very welcome, man. Thanks for having me. It was fun as always.
As always. And yeah, you will definitely see this man on the channel again very soon. We'll start working out ways to maybe turn this into a little bit of a series, but
right on.
Appreciate you guys for being here, and we'll catch you next time on another episode of Let's Talk Comics. Have a good night.